The Spanish Wikipedia is a Spanish-language edition of Wikipedia, a free online encyclopedia. It has 1,813,701 articles. Started in May 2001, it reached 100,000 articles on March 8, 2006 and 1 million articles on May 16, 2013. It is the 8th largest Wikipedia as measured by the number of articles and has the 4th most edits. It also ranks 12th in terms of depth among Wikipedias. Etymology. The origins of the Roman name Hispania, and the modern España, are uncertain, although the Phoenicians and Carthaginians referred to the region as Spania, therefore the most widely accepted etymology is a Levant Phoenician one. There have been a number of accounts and hypotheses of its origin. The Renaissance scholar Antonio de Nebrija proposed that the word Hispania evolved from the Iberian word Hispalis, meaning city of the Western world. Jesus Luis Conchillos argued that the root of the term span is the Phoenician word spy, meaning to forge metals. Therefore, Hispania would mean the land where metals are forged. It may be a derivation of the Phoenician Hispania, meaning island of rabbits, land of rabbits or edge, a reference to Spain's location at the end of the Mediterranean. Roman coins struck in the region from the reign of Hadrian show a female figure with a rabbit at her feet, and Strabo called it the land of the rabbits. The word in question actually means hyrax, possibly due to Phoenicians confusing the two animals. Hispania may derive from the poetic use of the term Hesperia, reflecting the Greek perception of Italy as a western land or land of the setting sun, and Spain, being still further west, as Hesperia Ultima. There is the claim that Hispania derives from the Basque word espana meaning edge or border, another reference to the fact that the Iberian Peninsula constitutes the southwest corner of the European continent. 2 15th century Spanish Jewish scholars, Don Isaac Abravanel and Solomon Ibn Verga, gave an explanation now considered folkloric. Both men wrote in two different published works that the first Jews to reach Spain were brought by ship by Pharos, who was confederate with the king of Babylon when he laid siege to Jerusalem. Pharos was a Grecian by birth, but who had been given a kingdom in Spain. Pharos became related by marriage to Aspan, the nephew of King Heracles, who also ruled over a kingdom in Spain. Heracles later renounced his throne in preference for his native Greece, leaving his kingdom to his nephew, Aspan, from whom the country of España took its name. Based upon their testimonies, this eponym would have already been in use in Spain by c. 350 BCE. History. Prehistory and pre-Roman peoples. Archaeological research at Atapuerca indicates the Iberian Peninsula was populated by hominids 1.2 million years ago. In Atapuerca fossils have been found of the earliest known hominins in Europe, Homo antecessor. Modern humans first arrived in Iberia, from the north on foot, about 35,000 years ago. The best-known artifacts of these prehistoric human settlements are the famous paintings in the Altamira cave of Cantabria in northern Iberia, which were created from 35,600 to 13,500 BCE by Cro-Magnon. Archaeological and genetic evidence suggests that the Iberian Peninsula acted as one of several major refugia from which northern Europe was repopulated following the end of the last ice age. The largest groups inhabiting the Iberian Peninsula before the Roman conquest were the Iberians and the Celts. The Iberians inhabited the Mediterranean side of the peninsula, from the northeast to the southeast. The Celts inhabited much of the interior and Atlantic side of the peninsula, from the northwest to the southwest. Basques occupied the western area of the Pyrenees mountain range and adjacent areas. The Phoenician-influenced Tartessians culture flourished in the southwest, and the Lusitanians and Vetwans occupied areas in the central west. Several cities were founded along the coast by Phoenicians, and trading outposts and colonies were established by Greeks in the east. Eventually, Phoenician Carthaginians expanded inland towards the Meseta. However, due to the bellicose inland tribes, the Carthaginians got settled in the coasts of the Iberian Peninsula, Roman Hispania and the Visigothic kingdom. During the Second Punic War, roughly between 210 and 205 BCE, the expanding Roman Republic captured Carthaginian trading colonies along the Mediterranean coast. Although it took the Romans nearly 2 centuries to complete the conquest of the Iberian Peninsula, they retained control of it for over 6 centuries. Roman rule was bound together by law, language, and the Roman road. The cultures of the pre-Roman populations were gradually Romanized at different rates depending on what part of the peninsula they lived in, with local leaders being admitted into the Roman aristocratic class. Hispania served as a granary for the Roman market, and its harbors exported gold, wool, olive oil, and wine. Agricultural production increased with the introduction of irrigation projects, some of which remain in use. Emperors Hadrian, Trajan, Theodosius I, and the philosopher Seneca were born in Hispania. Christianity was introduced into Hispania in the 1st century CE and it became popular in the cities in the 2nd century CE. Most of Spain's present languages and religion, and the basis of its laws, originate from this period. In the late 2nd century, incursions of North African Moori in the province of Baetica took place. The Germanic Suebi and Vandals, together with the Sarmatian Alans, entered the peninsula after 409, henceforth weakening the Western Roman Empire's jurisdiction over Hispania. These tribes had crossed the Rhine in early 407 and ravaged Gaul. The Suebi established a kingdom in northwestern Iberia, whereas the Vandals established themselves in the south of the peninsula by 420, before crossing over to North Africa Indiana 429. As the Western Empire disintegrated, the social and economic base became greatly simplified, but even in modified form, the successor regimes maintained many of the institutions and laws of the late empire, including Christianity and assimilation to the evolving Roman culture. The Byzantines established an occidental province, Spania, in the south, with the intention of reviving Roman rule throughout Iberia. Eventually, however, Hispania was reunited under Visigothic rule. These Visigoths, or Western Goths, after sacking Rome under the leadership of Alaric, turned towards the Iberian Peninsula, with Adolf for their leader, and occupied the northeastern portion. Wallia extended his rule over most of the peninsula, keeping the Suebians shut up in Galicia. Theodoric I took part, with the Romans and Franks, in the Battle of the Catalonian Plains, where Attila was routed. Euric, who put an end to the last remnants of Roman power in the peninsula, may be considered the first monarch of Spain, though the Suebians still maintained their independence in Galicia. Euric was also the first king to give written laws to the Visigoths. In the following reigns the Catholic kings of France assumed the role of protectors of the Hispano-Roman Catholics against the Arianism of the Visigoths, and in the wars which ensued Alaric II and Amalaric died. Athanagild, having risen against King Agila, called in the Byzantines and, in payment for the succor they gave him, ceded to them the maritime places of the southeast. Liovigild restored the political unity of the peninsula, subduing the Suebians, but the religious divisions of the country, reaching even the royal family, brought on a civil war. Saint Hermenegild, the king's son, putting himself at the head of the Catholics, was defeated and taken prisoner, and suffered martyrdom for rejecting communion with the Arians. Recard, son of Liovigild and brother of Saint Hermenegild, added religious unity to the political unity achieved by his father, accepting the Catholic faith in the Third Council of Toledo. The religious unity established by this council was the basis of that fusion of Goths with Hispano-Romans which produced the Spanish nation. Sisebut and Suintila completed the expulsion of the Byzantines from Spain. Intermarriage between Visigoths and Hispano-Romans was prohibited, though in practice it could not be entirely prevented and was eventually legalized by Liovigild. The Spanish Gothic scholars such as Braulio of Zaragoza and Isidore of Seville played an important role in keeping the classical Greek and Roman culture. Isidore was one of the most influential clerics and philosophers in the Middle Ages in Europe, and his theories were also vital to the conversion of the Visigothic kingdom from an Arian domain to a Catholic one in the Councils of Toledo. Isidore created the first Western encyclopedia, which had a huge impact during the Middle Ages. Muslim era and I Reconquista/I. None. Spanish Empire. In 1469, the crowns of the Christian kingdoms of Castile and Aragon were united by the marriage of their monarchs, Isabella I and Ferdinand II, respectively. 1478 commenced the completion of the conquest of the Canary Islands. In 1492, Jews were forced to choose between conversion to Catholicism or facing expulsion. As a result, as many as 200,000 Jews were expelled from Castile and Aragon. This was followed by expulsions in 1493 in Aragonese Sicily and Portugal in 1497. The Treaty of Granada guaranteed religious tolerance towards Muslims, for a few years before Islam was outlawed in 1502 in Castile and 1527 in Aragon, leading the remaining Muslim population to become nominally Christian Moriscos. About 4 decades after the War of the Alpujarras, a significant proportion of the Moriscos were expelled, settling primarily in North Africa. From 1609 to 1614, over 300,000 Moriscos were sent on ships to North Africa and other locations, and, of this figure, around 50,000 died resisting the expulsion, and 60,000 died on the journey. The year 1492 also marked the arrival of Christopher Columbus in the New World, during a voyage funded by Isabella. Columbus's first voyage crossed the Atlantic and reached the Caribbean islands, beginning the European exploration and conquest of the Americas, although Columbus remained convinced that he had reached the Orient. Large numbers of indigenous Americans died in battle against the Spaniards during the conquest, while more died from various new Eurasian diseases that traveled more quickly than the Spanish conquerors. The death toll during the initial period of Spanish conquest, from Columbus's initial landing until the mid-16th century, is estimated as high as 70 million indigenous people out of a population of 80 million, as imported diseases such as smallpox, measles, influenza, and typhus decimated the pre-Columbian population. Disease killed between 50% and 95% of the indigenous population. Some scholars have described the Spanish conquest during this period as the largest genocide in history. The Spanish colonization of the Americas started with the colonization of the Caribbean. It was followed by the conquest of powerful pre-Columbian polities in central Mexico and the Pacific coast of South America. Miscegenation was the rule between the native and the Spanish cultures and people. An expedition sponsored by the Spanish crown completed the first voyage around the world in human history, the Magellan-Elcano circumnavigation. The Tornavay or return route from the Philippines to Mexico made possible the Manila Galleon trading route. The Spanish encountered Islam in Southeast Asia, and in order to incorporate the Philippines, Spanish expeditions organized from newly Christianized Mexico had invaded the Philippine territories of the Sultanate of Brunei. The Spanish considered the war with the Muslims of Brunei and the Philippines a repeat of the Reconquista. A centralization of royal power ensued in the early modern period at the expense of local nobility, and the word España, whose root is the ancient name Hispania, began to be commonly used to designate the whole of the two kingdoms. With their wide-ranging political, legal, religious, and military reforms, the Hispanic monarchy emerged as a world power. The unification of the crowns of Aragon and Castile by the marriage of their sovereigns laid the basis for modern Spain and the Spanish Empire, although each kingdom of Spain remained a separate country socially, politically, legally, and in currency and language. Two big revolts broke out during the early reign of the Habsburg Emperor, Charles V, the revolt of the Comuneros in the Crown of Castile and revolt of the Brotherhoods in the Crown of Aragon. Habsburg Spain was one of the leading world powers throughout the 16th century and most of the 17th century, a position reinforced by trade and wealth from colonial possessions, and became the world's leading maritime power. It reached its apogee during the reigns of the first two Spanish Habsburgs, Charles V/I and Philip II. This period saw the Italian Wars, the Schmalkaldic War, the Dutch Revolt, the War of the Portuguese Succession, clashes with the Ottomans, intervention in the French Wars of Religion and the Anglo-Spanish War. Through exploration and conquest or royal marriage alliances and inheritance, the Spanish Empire expanded across vast areas in the Americas, the Indo-Pacific, Africa as well as the European continent. The first circumnavigation of the world was carried out in 1519–1521. The so-called Age of Discovery featured explorations by sea and by land, the opening up of new trade routes across oceans, conquests, and the beginnings of European colonialism. Precious metals, spices, luxuries, and previously unknown plants brought to the metropole played a leading part in transforming the European understanding of the globe. The cultural efflorescence witnessed during this period is now referred to as the Spanish Golden Age. The expansion of the empire caused immense upheaval in the Americas as the collapse of societies and empires and new diseases from Europe devastated American indigenous populations. The rise of humanism, the Counter-Reformation and new geographical discoveries and conquests raised issues that were addressed by the intellectual movement now known as the School of Salamanca, which developed the first modern theories of what are now known as international law and human rights. Juan Luis Vives was another prominent humanist during this period. Spain's 16th-century maritime supremacy was demonstrated by the victory over the Ottomans at Lepanto in 1571, and then after the setback of the Spanish Armada in 1588, in a series of victories against England in the Anglo-Spanish War of 1585–1604. However, during the middle decades of the 17th century, Spain's maritime power went into a long decline with mounting defeats against the United Provinces and then England, that by the 1660s it was struggling grimly to defend its overseas possessions from pirates and privateers. The Protestant Reformation dragged the kingdom ever more deeply into the mire of religiously charged wars. The result was a country forced into ever-expanding military efforts across Europe and in the Mediterranean. By the middle decades of a war and plague-ridden 17th-century Europe, the Spanish Habsburgs had enmeshed the country in continent-wide religious political conflicts. These conflicts drained it of resources and undermined the economy generally. Spain managed to hold on to most of the scattered Habsburg Empire, and helped the imperial forces of the Holy Roman Empire reverse a large part of the advances made by Protestant forces, but it was finally forced to recognize the separation of Portugal and the United Provinces, and eventually suffered some serious military reverses to France in the latter stages of the immensely destructive, Europe-wide 30 Years' War. In the latter half of the 17th century, Spain went into a gradual decline, during which it surrendered several small territories to France and England. However, it maintained and enlarged its vast overseas empire, which remained intact until the beginning of the 19th century. The decline culminated in a controversy over succession to the throne which consumed the first years of the 18th century. The War of the Spanish Succession was a wide-ranging international conflict combined with a civil war, and was to cost the kingdom its European possessions and its position as one of the leading powers on the continent. During this war, a new dynasty originating in France, the Bourbons, was installed. The crowns of Castile and Aragon had been long united only by the monarchy and the common institution of the Inquisition's Holy Office. A number of reform policies were pursued by the monarchy with the overarching goal of centralized authority and administrative uniformity. They included the abolishment of many of the old regional privileges and laws, as well as the customs barrier between the crowns of Aragon and Castile in 1717, followed by the introduction of new property taxes in the Aragonese kingdoms. The 18th century saw a gradual recovery and an increase in prosperity through much of the empire. The predominant economic policy was an interventionist one, and the state also pursued policies aiming towards infrastructure development as well as the abolition of internal customs and the reduction of export tariffs. Projects of agricultural colonization with new settlements took place in the south of mainland Spain. Enlightenment ideas began to gain ground among some of the kingdom's elite and monarchy. Liberalism and nation-state. In 1793, Spain went to war against the revolutionary New French Republic as a member of the First Coalition. The subsequent War of the Pyrenees polarized the country in a reaction against the Gallicist elites, and following defeat in the field, peace was made with France in 1795 at the Peace of Basel, in which Spain lost control over two-thirds of the island of Hispaniola. In 1807, a secret treaty between Napoleon and the unpopular Prime Minister led to a new declaration of war against Britain and Portugal. French troops entered the country to invade Portugal but instead occupied Spain's major fortresses. The Spanish king abdicated and a puppet kingdom satellite to the French Empire was installed with Napoleon's brother Joseph Bonaparte as king. The May 2, 1808 revolt was one of many uprisings across the country against the French occupation. These revolts marked the beginning of a devastating war of independence against the Napoleonic regime. Further military action by Spanish armies, guerrilla warfare, and an Anglo-Portuguese allied army, combined with Napoleon's failure on the Russian front, led to the retreat of French imperial armies from the Iberian Peninsula in 1814, and the return of King Ferdinand VII. During the war, in 1810, a revolutionary body, the Cortes of Cádiz, was assembled to coordinate the effort against the Bonapartist regime and to prepare a constitution. It met as one body, and its members represented the entire Spanish Empire. In 1812, a constitution for universal representation under a constitutional monarchy was declared, but after the fall of the Bonapartist regime, the Spanish king dismissed the Cortes generals, set on ruling as an absolute monarch. The French occupation of mainland Spain created an opportunity for overseas Criollo elites who resented the privilege towards peninsular elites and demanded retroversion of the sovereignty to the people. Starting in 1809, the American colonies began a series of revolutions and declared independence, leading to the Spanish-American Wars of Independence that put an end to the metropole's grip over the Spanish Main. Attempts to reassert control proved futile, with opposition not only in the colonies but also in the Iberian Peninsula, and army revolts followed, led by liberal officers. By the end of 1826, the only American colonies Spain held were Cuba and Puerto Rico. The Napoleonic War left Spain economically ruined, deeply divided, and politically unstable. In the 1830s and 1840s, Carlism fought against the government forces supportive of Queen Isabella II's dynastic rights in the Carlist Wars. Government forces prevailed, but the conflict between progressives and moderates ended in a weak early constitutional period. The 1868 Glorious Revolution was followed by the 1868–1874 Progressive Sexenio Democrático, which yielded to a stable monarchic period, the Restoration, a rigid bipartisan regime underpinned by the turnismo and the form of political representation at the countryside known as caciquismo. In the late 19th century, nationalist movements arose in the Philippines and Cuba. In 1895 and 1896 the Cuban War of Independence and the Philippine Revolution broke out, and eventually the United States became involved. The Spanish-American War was fought in the spring of 1898 and resulted in Spain losing the last of its once vast colonial empire outside of North Africa. El disaster, as the war became known in Spain, gave added impetus to the generation of 98 who were analyzing the country. Although the period around the turn of the century was one of increasing prosperity, the 20th century brought little social peace. Spain played a minor part in the scramble for Africa, with the colonization of Western Sahara, Spanish Morocco, and Spanish Guinea. It remained neutral during World War I. The heavy losses suffered by the colonial troops in conflicts in northern Morocco against Riffians forces brought discredit to the government and undermined the monarchy. Industrialization, the development of railways and incipient capitalism developed in several areas of the country, particularly in Barcelona, as well as labor movement and socialist and anarchist ideas. The 1888 Barcelona Universal Exposition and the 1870 Barcelona Labor Congress are good examples of this. In 1879, the Spanish Socialist Workers' Party was founded. A trade union linked to this party, Unión General de Trabajadores, was founded in 1888. In the anarcho-syndicalist trend of the labor movement in Spain, Confederación Nacional del Trabajo was founded in 1910 and Federación Anarquista Ibérica in 1927. Catalanism and Vasquism, alongside other nationalisms and regionalisms in Spain, arose in that period, being the Basque Nationalist Party formed in 1895 and Regionalist League of Catalonia in 1901. Political corruption and repression weakened the democratic system of the constitutional monarchy of a two-parties system. The July 1909 tragic week events and repression exemplified the social instability of the time. The Law Canadiense strike in 1919 led to the first law limiting the working day to 8 hours. After a period of Crown-supported dictatorship from 1923 to 1931, the first elections since 1923, largely understood as a plebiscite on monarchy, took place, the April 12, 1931 municipal elections. These gave a resounding victory to the Republican Socialist candidacies in large cities and provincial capitals, with the majority of monarchist councillors in rural areas. The king left the country and the proclamation of the Republic on April 14 ensued, with the formation of a provisional government. A constitution for the country was passed in October 1931 following the June 1931 Constituent General Election, and a series of cabinets presided by Manuel Azana supported by Republican parties and the PSOE followed. In the election held in 1933 the right triumphed and in 1936, the left. During the Second Republic there was a great political and social upheaval, marked by a sharp radicalization of the left and the right. Instances of political violence during this period included the burning of churches, the 1932 failed coup d'état led by José Sanjurjo, the revolution of 1934 and numerous attacks against rival political leaders. On the other hand, it is also during the Second Republic when important reforms to modernize the country were initiated, a democratic constitution, agrarian reform, restructuring of the army, political decentralization, and women's right to vote. Civil War and Francoist dictatorship. The Spanish Civil War broke out in 1936, on 17 and July 18. Part of the military carried out a coup d'état that triumphed in only part of the country. The situation led to a civil war, in which the territory was divided into two zones, one under the authority of the Republican government, that counted on outside support from the Soviet Union and Mexico, and the other controlled by the putschists, most critically supported by Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy. The Republic was not supported by the Western powers due to the British-led policy of non-intervention. General Francisco Franco was sworn in as the supreme leader of the rebels on October 1, 1936. An uneasy relationship between the Republican government and the grassroots anarchists who had initiated a partial social revolution also ensued. The Civil War was viciously fought and there were many atrocities committed by all sides. The war claimed the lives of over 500,000 people and caused the flight of up to 500,000 citizens from the country. On April 1, 1939, 5 months before the beginning of World War II, the rebel side led by Franco emerged victorious, imposing a dictatorship over the whole country. Thousands of men and women were imprisoned after the Civil War in Francoist concentration camps, with approximately 367,000 to 500,000 prisoners being held in 50 camps or prisons. The regime remained chiefly neutral from a nominal standpoint in the Second World War, although it was sympathetic to the Axis and provided the Nazi Wehrmacht with Spanish volunteers in the Eastern Front. The only legal party under Franco's dictatorship was the Falange Española Tradicionalista y de los Junts, formed in 1937 upon the merging of the fascist Falange Española de los Junts and the Carlist Traditionalists, and to which the rest of right-wing groups supporting the rebels also added. The name of Movimiento Nacional, sometimes understood as a wider structure than the Fety de los Junts proper, largely imposed over the latter's name in official documents along the 1950s. After World War II, Spain was politically and economically isolated, and was kept out of the United Nations. This changed in 1955, during the Cold War period, when it became strategically important for the U.S. to establish a military presence on the Iberian Peninsula as a counter to any possible move by the Soviet Union into the Mediterranean basin. In the 1960s, Spain registered an unprecedented rate of economic growth which was propelled by industrialization, a mass internal migration from rural areas to Madrid, Barcelona, and the Basque Country, and the creation of a mass tourism industry. Franco's rule was also characterized by authoritarianism, promotion of a unitary national identity, national Catholicism, and discriminatory language policies. Restoration of democracy. In 1962, a group of politicians involved in the opposition to Franco's regime inside the country and in exile met in the Congress of the European Movement in Munich, where they made a resolution in favor of democracy. With Franco's death in November 1975, Juan Carlos succeeded to the position of King of Spain and head of state in accordance with the Francoist law. With the approval of the new Spanish Constitution of 1978 and the restoration of democracy, the state devolved much authority to the regions and created an internal organization based on autonomous communities. The Spanish 1977 amnesty law let people of Franco's regime continue inside institutions without consequences, even perpetrators of some crimes during transition to democracy, like the massacre of March 3, 1976 in Vitoria, or 1977 massacre of Atocha. In the Basque Country, moderate Basque nationalism coexisted with a radical nationalist movement led by the armed organization EDA until the latter's dissolution in May 2018. The group was formed in 1959 during Franco's rule but had continued to wage its violent campaign even after the restoration of democracy and the return of a large measure of regional autonomy. On February 23, 1981, rebel elements among the security forces seized the Cortes in an attempt to impose a military-backed government. King Juan Carlos took personal command of the military and successfully ordered the coup plotters, via national television, to surrender. During the 1980s, the democratic restoration made possible a growing open society. New cultural movements based on freedom appeared, like La Movida Madrilena. In May 1982, Spain joined NATO, followed by a referendum after a strong social opposition. That year the Spanish Socialist Workers' Party came to power, the first left-wing government in 43 years. In 1986 Spain joined the European Economic Community, which later became the European Union. The PSOE was replaced in government by the Partido Popular in 1996 after scandals around participation of the government of Felipe González in the dirty war against EDA. At that point the PSOE had served almost 14 consecutive years in office. On January 1, 2002, Spain fully adopted the euro, and Spain experienced strong economic growth, well above the EU average during the early 2000s. However, well-publicized concerns issued by many economic commentators at the height of the boom warned that extraordinary property prices and a high foreign trade deficit were likely to lead to a painful economic collapse. In 2002, the Prestige oil spill occurred with big ecological consequences along Spain's Atlantic coastline. In 2003, José María Aznar supported U.S. President George W. Bush in the Iraq War, and a strong movement against war rose in Spanish society. In March 2004, a local Islamist terrorist group inspired by Al-Qaeda carried out the largest terrorist attack in Western European history when they killed 191 people and wounded more than 1,800 others by bombing commuter trains in Madrid. Though initial suspicions focused on the Basque terrorist group EDA, evidence of Islamist involvement soon emerged. Because of the proximity of the 2004 Spanish general election, the issue of responsibility quickly became a political controversy, with the main competing parties PP and PSOE exchanging accusations over the handling of the incident. The election's PSOE won the election, led by José Luis Rodríguez Zapatero. In the early 2000s, the proportion of Spain's foreign-born population increased rapidly during its economic boom but then declined due to the financial crisis. In 2005, the Spanish government legalized same-sex marriage, becoming the third country worldwide to do so. Decentralization was supported with much resistance of constitutional court and conservative opposition, so did gender politics like quotas or the law against gender violence. Government talks with EDA happened, and the group announced its permanent cease of violence in 2010. The bursting of the Spanish property bubble in 2008 led to the 2008-16 Spanish financial crisis. High levels of unemployment, cuts in government spending and corruption in royal family and People's Party served as a backdrop to the 2011-12 Spanish protests. Catalan independentism also rose. In 2011, Mariano Rajoy's Conservative People's Party won the election with 44.6% of votes. As Prime Minister, he implemented austerity measures for EU bailout, the EU Stability and Growth Pact. On June 19, 2014, the monarch, Juan Carlos, abdicated in favor of his son, who became Felipe VI. In October 2017, a Catalan independence referendum was held and the Catalan Parliament voted to unilaterally declare independence from Spain to form a Catalan Republic on the day the Spanish Senate was discussing approving direct rule over Catalonia as called for by the Spanish Prime Minister. On the same day the Senate granted the power to impose direct rule and Rajoy dissolved the Catalan Parliament and called a new election. No country recognized Catalonia as a separate state. In June 2018, the Congress of Deputies passed a motion of no confidence against Rajoy and replaced him with the PSOE leader Pedro Sanchez. In January 2020, the COVID-19 virus was confirmed to have spread to Spain, where it had caused as of June 2021 more than 80,000 deaths, causing life expectancy to drop by more than 1 year. In March 2021, Spain became the sixth nation in the world to make active euthanasia legal. Geography. At 505,992 square kilometers, Spain is the world's 52nd largest country and Europe's fourth largest country. It is some 47,000 square kilometers smaller than France. Mount Teide is the highest mountain peak in Spain and is the third largest volcano in the world from its base. Spain is a transcontinental country, having territory in both Europe and Africa. Spain lies between latitudes 27 degrees and 44 degrees north, and longitudes 19 degrees west and 5 degrees east. On the west, Spain is bordered by Portugal. On the south, it is bordered by Gibraltar and Morocco, through its exclaves in North Africa. On the northeast, along the Pyrenees mountain range, it is bordered by France and Andorra. Along the Pyrenees in Girona, a small exclave town called Livia is surrounded by France. Extending to 1,214 kilometers, the Portugal-Spain border is the longest uninterrupted border within the European Union. Islands. Spain also includes the Balearic Islands in the Mediterranean Sea, the Canary Islands in the Atlantic Ocean, and a number of uninhabited islands on the Mediterranean side of the Strait of Gibraltar, known as plazas de soberania, such as the Chafarinas Islands and Alhucemas. The peninsula of Davos de la Gomera is also regarded as a plaza de soberania. The Isle of Alboran, located in the Mediterranean between Spain and North Africa, is also administered by Spain, specifically by the municipality of Almería, Andalusia. The Little Pheasant Island in the River Bidaso is a Spanish-French condominium. There are 11 major islands in Spain, all of them having their own governing bodies. These islands are specifically mentioned by the Spanish Constitution, when fixing its senatorial representation. These islands include Tenerife, Gran Canaria, Lanzarote, Fuerteventura, La Palma, La Gomera, and El Hierro in the Canarian Archipelago, and Mallorca, Ibiza, Menorca and Formentera in the Balearic Archipelago. Mountains and rivers. Mainland Spain is a rather mountainous landmass, dominated by high plateaus and mountain chains. After the Pyrenees, the main mountain ranges are the Cordillera Cantábrica, Sistema Ibérico, Sistema Central, Montes de Toledo, Sierra Morena, and the Sistema Batico, whose highest peak, the 3,478-meter-high Mul Hassan, located in Sierra Nevada, is the highest elevation in the Iberian Peninsula. The highest point in Spain is the Tide, a 3,718-meter active volcano in the Canary Islands. The Meseta Central is a vast plateau in the heart of peninsular Spain, split in two by the Sistema Central. There are several major rivers in Spain such as the Tagus, Ebro, Guadiana, Douro, Guadalquivir, Júcar, Segura, Turia, and Minho. Alluvial plains are found along the coast, the largest of which is that of the Guadalquivir in Andalusia. Climate. 3 main climatic zones can be separated, according to geographical situation and orographic conditions. The Mediterranean climate, characterized by warm/hot and dry summers, is dominant in the peninsula. It has 2 varieties, CSA and CSB, according to the Köppen climate classification. The CSA zone is associated to areas with hot summers. It is predominant in the Mediterranean and southern Atlantic coast and inland throughout Andalusia, Extremadura, and much, if not most, of the center of the country. The CSA zone covers climatic zones with both warm and cool winters, which are considered extremely different from each other at a local level, reason for which Köppen classification is often eschewed within Spain. Local climatic maps generally divide the Mediterranean zone between warm winter and cool winter zones, rather than according to summer temperatures. The CSB zone has warm rather than hot summers, and extends to additional cool winter areas not typically associated with a Mediterranean climate, such as much of central and northern central of Spain and into much Rainier areas. Note areas with substantial summer rainfall such as Galicia are classed as oceanic. The semi-arid climate is predominant in the southeastern quarter of the country, but is also widespread in other areas of Spain. It covers most of the region of Murcia, southern Valencia, and eastern Andalusia. Further to the north, it is predominant in the upper and mid reaches of the Ebro Valley, which crosses southern Navarre, central Aragon, and western Catalonia. It also is found in Madrid, Extremadura, Castilla-La Mancha, and some locations of western Andalusia. The dry season extends beyond the summer and average temperature depends on altitude and latitude. The oceanic climate, located in the northern quarter of the country, especially in the Atlantic region. Additionally, it is also found in northern Navarre, in most highlands areas along the Iberian system and in the Pyrenean valleys, where a humid subtropical variant also occurs. Winter and summer temperatures are influenced by the ocean, and have no seasonal drought. Apart from these main types, other subtypes can be found, like the alpine climate in areas with very high altitude, the humid subtropical climate in areas of northeastern Spain and the continental climates in the Pyrenees as well as parts of the Cantabrian Range, the Central System, Sierra Nevada, and the Iberian System, and a typical desert climate in the zone of Almería, Murcia, and eastern Canary Islands. Low-lying areas of the Canary Islands average above 18.0 degrees Celsius during their coolest month, thus having a tropical climate. Fauna and flora. The fauna presents a wide diversity that is due in large part to the geographical position of the Iberian Peninsula between the Atlantic and the Mediterranean and between Africa and Eurasia, and the great diversity of habitats and biotopes, the result of a considerable variety of climates and well-differentiated regions. The vegetation of Spain is varied due to several factors including the diversity of the terrain, the climate, and latitude. Spain includes different phytogeographic regions, each with its own floral characteristics resulting largely from the interaction of climate, topography, soil type, and fire, and biotic factors. The country had a 2019 Forest Landscape Integrity Index mean score of 4.23/10, ranking it 130th globally out of 172 countries. Within the European territory, Spain has the largest number of plant species of all European countries. In Spain there are 17,804 million trees and an average of 284 million more grow each year. Politics. The constitutional history of Spain dates back to the Constitution of 1812. In June 1976, Spain's new king Juan Carlos dismissed Carlos Arias Navarro and appointed the reformer Adolfo Suárez as prime minister. The resulting general election in 1977 convened the Constituent Cortes for the purpose of drafting and approving the Constitution of 1978. After a national referendum on December 6, 1978, 88% of voters approved of the new constitution, a culmination of the Spanish transition to democracy. As a result, Spain is now composed of 17 autonomous communities and 2 autonomous cities with varying degrees of autonomy thanks to its constitution, which nevertheless explicitly states the indivisible unity of the Spanish nation. The Constitution also specifies that Spain has no state religion and that all are free to practice and believe as they wish. The Spanish administration approved the Gender Equality Act in 2007 aimed at furthering equality between genders in Spanish political and economic life. According to Interparliamentary Union data as of September 1, 2018, 137 of the 350 members of the Congress were women, while in the Senate, there were 101 women out of 266, placing Spain 16th on their list of countries ranked by proportion of women in the lower house. The gender empowerment measure of Spain in the United Nations Human Development Report is 0.794, 12th in the world. Government. Spain is a constitutional monarchy, with a hereditary monarch and a bicameral parliament, the Cortes Generales. The legislative branch is made up of the Congress of Deputies, a lower house with 350 members, elected by popular vote on block lists by proportional representation to serve 4-year terms, and the Senate, an upper house with 259 seats of which 208 are directly elected by popular vote, using a limited voting method, and the other 51 appointed by the regional legislatures to also serve 4-year terms. The executive branch consists of a council of ministers presided over by the Prime Minister, who is nominated as candidate by the monarch after holding consultations with representatives from the different parliamentary groups, voted in by the members of the lower house during an investiture session and then formally appointed by the monarch. Head of State. Felipe VI, since June 19, 2014. Government. Prime Minister or President of the Government, Pedro Sánchez Pérez Castellón, elected June 1, 2018. Deputy Prime Ministers, currently Nadia Calvino Santamaría, Yolanda Díaz Pérez, Teresa Ribera Rodríguez. Ministers, Second Government of Pedro Sánchez. The Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Ministers and the rest of ministers convene at the Council of Ministers. Spain is organizationally structured as a so-called Estado de las Autonomías. It is one of the most decentralized countries in Europe, along with Switzerland, Germany, and Belgium. For example, all autonomous communities have their own elected parliaments, governments, public administrations, budgets, and resources. Health and education systems among others are managed by the Spanish communities, and in addition, the Basque Country and Navarre also manage their own public finances based on foral provisions. In Catalonia, the Basque Country, Navarre, and the Canary Islands, a full-fledged autonomous police corps replaces some of the state police functions. Foreign relations. After the return of democracy following the death of Franco in 1975, Spain's foreign policy priorities were to break out of the diplomatic isolation of the Franco years and expand diplomatic relations, enter the European Community, and define security relations with the West. As a member of NATO since 1982, Spain has established itself as a participant in multilateral international security activities. Spain's EU membership represents an important part of its foreign policy. Even on many international issues beyond Western Europe, Spain prefers to coordinate its efforts with its EU partners through the European political cooperation mechanisms. Spain has maintained its special relations with Hispanic America and the Philippines. Its policy emphasizes the concept of an Ibero-American community, essentially the renewal of the concept of Hispanidad or Hispanismo, as it is often referred to in English, which has sought to link the Iberian Peninsula with Hispanic America through language, commerce, history, and culture. It is fundamentally based on shared values and the recovery of democracy. Territorial disputes. Spain claims Gibraltar, a 6 square kilometre overseas territory of the United Kingdom in the southernmost part of the Iberian Peninsula. Then a Spanish town, it was conquered by an Anglo-Dutch force in 1704 during the War of the Spanish Succession on behalf of Archduke Charles, pretender to the Spanish throne. The legal situation concerning Gibraltar was settled in 1713 by the Treaty of Utrecht, in which Spain ceded the territory in perpetuity to the British Crown, stating that, should the British abandon this post, it would be offered to Spain first. Since the 1940s, Spain has called for the return of Gibraltar. The overwhelming majority of Gibraltarians strongly oppose this, along with any proposal of shared sovereignty. UN resolutions call on the United Kingdom and Spain to reach an agreement over the status of Gibraltar. The Spanish claim makes a distinction between the isthmus that connects the rock to the Spanish mainland on the one hand, and the rock and city of Gibraltar on the other. While the rock and city were ceded by the Treaty of Utrecht, Spain asserts that the occupation of the isthmus is illegal and against the principles of international law. The United Kingdom relies on de facto arguments of possession by prescription in relation to the isthmus, as there has been continuous possession over a long period. Another dispute surrounds the Savage Islands, which Spain acknowledges to be part of Portugal. However, Spain claims that they are rocks rather than islands, and therefore Spain does not accept the Portuguese exclusive economic zone generated by the islands, while acknowledging the Selvagens as possessing territorial waters. On July 5, 2013, Spain sent a letter to the UN expressing these views. Spain claims sovereignty over the Perigal Island, a small, uninhabited rocky islet located in the south shore of the Strait of Gibraltar. The island lies 250 meters just off the coast of Morocco, 8 kilometers from Ceuta and 13.5 kilometers from mainland Spain. Its sovereignty is disputed between Spain and Morocco. It was the subject of an armed incident between the two countries in 2002. The incident ended when both countries agreed to return to the status quo ante which existed prior to the Moroccan occupation of the island. The islet is now deserted and without any sign of sovereignty. Besides the Perejil Island, the Spanish-held territories claimed by other countries are two. Morocco claims the Spanish cities of Ceuta and Melilla and the Plazas de Soberania islets off the northern coast of Africa. Portugal does not recognize Spain's sovereignty over the territory of Olivenza, which was annexed by Spain in 1801 after the War of the Oranges. The Portuguese stance is that the territory is de jure Portuguese territory and de facto Spanish. Military. The armed forces of Spain are known as the Spanish Armed Forces. Their commander-in-chief is the King of Spain, Felipe VI. The next military authorities in line are the Prime Minister and the Minister of Defense. The fourth military authority of the state is the Chief of the Defense Staff. The Defense Staff assists the GEMID as auxiliary body. The Spanish armed forces are divided into three branches: Army, Navy, Air and Space Force. Military conscription was suppressed in 2001. Human rights. The Spanish Constitution of 1978 protect all Spaniards and all the peoples of Spain in the exercise of human rights, their cultures and traditions, languages and institutions. According to Amnesty International, government investigations of alleged police abuses are often lengthy and punishments were light. Violence against women was a problem, which the government took steps to address. Spain provides one of the highest degrees of liberty in the world for its LGBT community. Among the countries studied by Pew Research Center in 2013, Spain is rated first in acceptance of homosexuality, with 88% of those surveyed saying that homosexuality should be accepted. Administrative divisions. The Spanish state is divided into 17 autonomous communities and 2 autonomous cities, both groups being the highest or first-order administrative division in the country. Autonomous communities are divided into provinces, of which there are 50 in total, and in turn, provinces are divided into municipalities. In Catalonia, 2 additional divisions exist, the Comarques and the Vegueries, both of which have administrative powers, Comarques being aggregations of municipalities, and the Vegueries being aggregations of comarques. The concept of a comarca exists in all autonomous communities, however, unlike Catalonia, these are merely historical or geographical subdivisions. Autonomous communities. Provinces and municipalities. Economy. Spain's capitalist mixed economy is the 14th largest worldwide and the 4th largest in the European Union, as well as the Eurozone's 4th largest. The center-right government of former Prime Minister José María Aznar worked successfully to gain admission to the group of countries launching the euro in 1999. Unemployment stood at 17.1% in June 2017. Below Spain's early 1990s unemployment rate of at over 20%. The youth unemployment rate is extremely high compared to EU standards. Perennial weak points of Spain's economy include a large informal economy, and an education system which OECD reports place among the poorest for developed countries, along with the United States. By the mid-1990s the economy had commenced the growth that had been disrupted by the global recession of the early 1990s. The strong economic growth helped the government to reduce the government debt as a percentage of GDP, and Spain's high unemployment rate began to steadily decline. With the government budget in balance and inflation under control, Spain was admitted into the Eurozone in 1999. Since the 1990s some Spanish companies have gained multinational status, often expanding their activities in culturally closed Latin America. Spain is the second biggest foreign investor there, after the United States. Spanish companies have also expanded into Asia, especially China and India. This early global expansion is a competitive advantage over its competitors and European neighbors. The reason for this early expansion is the booming interest towards Spanish language and culture in Asia and Africa, and a corporate culture that learned to take risks in unstable markets. Spanish companies invested in fields like renewable energy commercialization, technology companies like Telefónica, Abengoa, Mondragon Corporation, Movistar, Hisdesat, Indra, train manufacturers like CAF, Talgo, global corporations such as the textile company Inditex, petroleum companies like Repsol or Cepsa, and infrastructure, with 6 of the 10 biggest international construction firms specializing in transport being Spanish, like Ferrovial, Acciona, ACS, OL and FCC. In 2005, The Economist Intelligence Unit's Quality of Life survey placed Spain among the top 10 in the world. In 2013, the same survey ranked Spain 28th in the world. In 2010, the Basque city of Bilbao was awarded with the Lee Kuan Yew World City Prize, and its mayor at the time, Iñaki Azkuna, was awarded the World Mayor Prize in 2012. The Basque capital city of Vitoria-Gasteiz received the European Green Capital Award in 2012. Automotive industry. The automotive industry is one of the largest employers in the country. In 2015, Spain was the 8th largest automobile producer country in the world and the 2nd largest car manufacturer in Europe after Germany. By 2016, the automotive industry was generating 8.7% of Spain's gross domestic product, employing about 9% of the manufacturing industry. By 2008, the automobile industry was the 2nd most exported industry, while in 2015 about 80% of the total production was for export. German companies poured €4.8 billion into Spain in 2015, making the country the 2nd largest destination for German foreign direct investment behind only the US. The lion's share of that investment, €4 billion, went to the country's auto industry. Agriculture. Crop areas were farmed in 2 highly diverse manners. Areas relying on non-irrigated cultivation, which made up 85% of the entire crop area, depended solely on rainfall as a source of water. They included the humid regions of the north and the northwest, as well as vast arid zones that had not been irrigated. The much more productive regions devoted to irrigated cultivation accounted for 3 million hectares in 1986, and the government hoped that this area would eventually double, as it already had doubled since 1950. Particularly noteworthy was the development in Almeria, one of the most arid and desolate provinces of Spain, of winter crops of various fruits and vegetables for export to Europe. Though only about 17% of Spain's cultivated land was irrigated, it was estimated to be the source of between 40 and 45% of the gross value of crop production and of 50% of the value of agricultural exports. More than half of the irrigated area was planted in corn, fruit trees, and vegetables. Other agricultural products that benefited from irrigation included grapes, cotton, sugar beets, potatoes, legumes, olive trees, mangoes, strawberries, tomatoes, and fodder grasses. Depending on the nature of the crop, it was possible to harvest 2 successive crops in the same year on about 10% of the country's irrigated land. Citrus fruits, vegetables, cereal grains, olive oil, and wine. Spain's traditional agricultural products continued to be important in the 1980s. In 1983 they represented 12%, 8%, 6%, and 4%, respectively, of the country's agricultural production. Because of the changed diet of an increasingly affluent population, there was a notable increase in the consumption of livestock, poultry, and dairy products. Meat production for domestic consumption became the single most important agricultural activity, accounting for 30% of all farm-related production in 1983. Increased attention to livestock was the reason that Spain became a net importer of grains. Ideal growing conditions, combined with proximity to important North European markets, made citrus fruits Spain's leading export. Fresh vegetables and fruits produced through intensive irrigation farming also became important export commodities, as did sunflower seed oil that was produced to compete with the more expensive olive oils in oversupply throughout the Mediterranean countries of the European Community. Tourism. In 2017, Spain was the second most visited country in the world, recording 82 million tourists, which marked the fifth consecutive year of record-beating numbers. The headquarters of the World Tourism Organization are located in Madrid. Spain's geographic location, popular coastlines, diverse landscapes, historical legacy, vibrant culture, and excellent infrastructure has made the country's international tourist industry among the largest in the world. In the last 5 decades, international tourism in Spain has grown to become the second largest in the world in terms of spending, worth approximately €40 billion or about 5% of GDP in 2006. Castile and León is the Spanish leader in rural tourism linked to its environmental and architectural heritage. Energy. In 2010, Spain became the solar power world leader when it overtook the United States with a massive power station plant called La Florida, near Alvarado, Badajoz. Spain is also Europe's main producer of wind energy. In 2010, its wind turbines generated 42,976 GWh, which accounted for 16.4% of all electrical energy produced in Spain. On November 9, 2010, wind energy reached an instantaneous historic peak, covering 53% of mainland electricity demand and generating an amount of energy that is equivalent to that of 14 nuclear reactors. Other renewable energies used in Spain are hydroelectric, biomass and marine. Non-renewable energy sources used in Spain are nuclear, gas, coal, and oil. Fossil fuels together generated 58% of Spain's electricity in 2009, just below the OECD mean of 61%. Nuclear power generated another 19%, and wind and hydro about 12% each. Transport. The Spanish road system is mainly centralized, with 6 highways connecting Madrid to the Basque Country, Catalonia, Valencia, West Andalusia, Extremadura, and Galicia. Additionally, there are highways along the Atlantic, Cantabrian, and Mediterranean coasts. Spain aims to put 1 million electric cars on the road by 2014 as part of the government's plan to save energy and boost energy efficiency. The former Minister of Industry Miguel Sebastián said that the electric vehicle is the future and the engine of an industrial revolution. Spain has the most extensive high-speed rail network in Europe, and the second most extensive in the world after China. As of 2019, Spain has a total of over 3,400 kilometers of high-speed tracks linking Malaga, Seville, Madrid, Barcelona, Valencia, and Valladolid, with the trains operated at commercial speeds up to 310 km per hour. On average, the Spanish high-speed train is the fastest one in the world, followed by the Japanese bullet train and the French TGV. Regarding punctuality, it is second in the world after the Japanese Shinkansen. Should the aims of the ambitious AVE program be met, by 2020 Spain will have 7,000 kilometers of high-speed trains linking almost all provincial cities to Madrid in less than 3 hours and Barcelona within 4 hours. There are 47 public airports in Spain. The busiest one is the airport of Madrid, with 50 million passengers in 2011, being the world's 15th busiest airport, as well as the European Union's 4th busiest. The airport of Barcelona is also important, with 35 million passengers in 2011, being the world's 31st busiest airport. Other main airports are located in Majorca, Malaga, Las Palmas, Alicante, and smaller, with the number of passengers between 4 and 10 million, for example Tenerife, Valencia, Seville, Bilbao, Ibiza, Lanzarote, Fuerteventura. Also, more than 30 airports with the number of passengers below 4 million. Science and Technology. The Consejo Superior de Investigaciones Científicas is the leading public agency dedicated to scientific research in the country. It ranked as the 5th top governmental scientific institution worldwide in the 2018 SCImago Institutions rankings. Spain was ranked 30th in the Global Innovation Index in 2021, down from 29th in 2019. Higher education institutions perform about 60% of the basic research in the country. Likewise, the contribution of the private sector to R&D expenditures is much lower than in other EU and OECD countries. Since 2006, the Mobile World Congress has taken place in Barcelona. Demographics. In 2019, the population of Spain officially reached 47 million people, as recorded by the Padrón Municipal. Spain's population density, at 91/km2, is lower than that of most Western European countries, and its distribution across the country is very unequal. With the exception of the region surrounding the capital, Madrid, the most populated areas lie around the coast. The population of Spain has risen 2.5 times since 1900, when it stood at 18.6 million, principally due to the spectacular demographic boom in the 1960s and early 1970s. In 2017, the average total fertility rate across Spain was 1.33 children born per woman, one of the lowest in the world, below the replacement rate of 2.1. It remains considerably below the high of 5.11 children born per woman in 1865. Spain subsequently has one of the oldest populations in the world, with the average age of 43.1 years. Native Spaniards make up 88% of the total population of Spain. After the birth rate plunged in the 1980s and Spain's population growth rate dropped, the population again trended upward initially upon the return of many Spaniards who had emigrated to other European countries during the 1970s, and more recently, fueled by large numbers of immigrants who make up 12% of the population. The immigrants originate mainly in Latin America, North Africa, Eastern Europe, and Sub-Saharan Africa. In 2005, Spain instituted a 3-month amnesty program through which certain hitherto undocumented aliens were granted legal residency. In 2008, Spain granted citizenship to 84,170 persons, mostly to people from Ecuador, Colombia, and Morocco. Many foreign residents in Spain also come from other Western and Central European countries. These are mostly British, French, German, Dutch, and Norwegian. They reside primarily on the Mediterranean coast and the Balearic Islands, where many are retired or remote workers. Substantial populations descended from Spanish colonists and immigrants exist in other parts of the world, most notably in Latin America. Beginning in the late 15th century, large numbers of Iberian colonists settled in what became Latin America, and at present most white Latin Americans are of Spanish or Portuguese origin. Around 240,000 Spaniards emigrated in the 16th century, mostly to Mexico. Another 450,000 left in the 17th century. The estimate between 1492 and 1832 is 1.86 million. Between 1846 and 1932 it is estimated that nearly 5 million Spaniards emigrated to the Americas, especially to Argentina and Brazil. Approximately 2 million Spaniards migrated to other Western European countries between 1960 and 1975. During the same period perhaps 300,000 went to Latin America. Urbanization. Metropolitan areas. Source: Areas Urbanas plus 50, Ministry of Public Works and Transport. Peoples. The Spanish Constitution of 1978, in its second article, generically recognizes contemporary entities, nationalities and regions within the context of the Spanish nation. Spain has been described as a de facto plurinational state. The identity of Spain rather accrues of an overlap of different territorial and ethno-linguistic identities than of a sole Spanish identity. In some cases, some of the territorial identities may conflict with the dominant Spanish culture. Distinct traditional identities within Spain include the Basques, Catalans, Galicians, Andalusians, and Valencians, although to some extent all of the 17 autonomous communities may claim a distinct local identity. It is this last feature of shared identity between the more local level or autonomous community and the Spanish level which makes the identity question in Spain complex and far from univocal. Minority groups. Spain has a number of descendants of populations from former colonies, especially Latin America and North Africa. Smaller numbers of immigrants from several sub-Saharan countries have recently been settling in Spain. There are also sizable numbers of Asian immigrants, most of whom are of Middle Eastern, South Asian and Chinese origin. The single largest group of immigrants are European, represented by large numbers of Romanians, Britons, Germans, French, and others. The arrival of the Gitanos, a Romani people, began in the 16th century. Estimates of the Spanish Roma population range from 750,000 to over 1 million. There are also the Murciéros, a formerly nomadic minority group. Their origin is unclear. Historically, Sephardi Jews and Moriscos are the main minority groups originating in Spain and with a contribution to Spanish culture. The Spanish government is offering Spanish nationality to Sephardi Jews. Immigration. According to the official Spanish statistics, there were 5.4 million foreign residents in Spain in 2020, while all citizens born outside of Spain were 7.2 million in 2020. 15.23% of the total population. According to residence permit data for 2011, more than 860,000 were Romanian, about 770,000 were Moroccan, approximately 390,000 were British, and 360,000 were Ecuadorian. Other sizable foreign communities are Colombian, Bolivian, German, Italian, Bulgarian, and Chinese. There are more than 200,000 migrants from sub-Saharan Africa living in Spain, principally Senegaleses and Nigerians. Since 2000, Spain has experienced high population growth as a result of immigration flows, despite a birth rate that is only half the replacement level. This sudden and ongoing inflow of immigrants, particularly those arriving illegally by sea, has caused noticeable social tension. Within the EU, Spain had the second highest immigration rate in percentage terms after Cyprus, but by a great margin, the highest in absolute numbers, up to 2008. The number of immigrants in Spain had grown up from 500,000 people in 1996 to 5.2 million in 2008 out of a total population of 46 million. In 2005 alone, a regularization program increased the legal immigrant population by 700,000 people. There are a number of reasons for the high level of immigration, including Spain's cultural ties with Latin America, its geographical position, the porosity of its borders, the large size of its underground economy and the strength of the agricultural and construction sectors, which demand more low-cost labor than can be offered by the national workforce. Another statistically significant factor is the large number of residents of EU origin typically retiring to Spain's Mediterranean coast. In fact, Spain was Europe's largest absorber of migrants from 2002 to 2007, with its immigrant population more than doubling as 2.5 million people arrived. In 2008, prior to the onset of the economic crisis, the Financial Times reported that Spain was the most favored destination for Western Europeans considering a move from their own country and seeking jobs elsewhere in the EU. In 2008, the government instituted a plan of voluntary return which encouraged unemployed immigrants from outside the EU to return to their home countries and receive several incentives, including the right to keep their unemployment benefits and transfer whatever they contributed to the Spanish Social Security. The program had little effect. During its first 2 months, just 1,400 immigrants took up the offer. What the program failed to do, the sharp and prolonged economic crisis has done from 2010 to 2011 in that tens of thousands of immigrants have left the country due to lack of jobs. In 2011 alone, more than 500,000 people left Spain. For the first time in decades, the net migration rate was expected to be negative, and 9 out of 10 immigrants were foreigners. Languages. Spain is a multilingual state. Spanish featured in the 1978 Spanish Constitution as Castellano has effectively been the official language of the entire country since 1931. As allowed in the third article of the Constitution, the other Spanish languages can also become official in their respective autonomous communities. The territoriality created by the form of co-officiality codified in the 1978 Constitution creates an asymmetry, in which Spanish speakers' rights apply to the entire territory whereas vis-a-vis the rest of co-official languages, their speakers' rights only apply in their territories. Besides Spanish, other territorialized languages include Aragonese, Aranese, Asturleones, Basque, Ceutan Arabic, Catalan, Galician, Portuguese and Tamazight, to which the Romani Calo and the sign languages may add up. The number of speakers varies widely and their legal recognition is uneven, with some of the most vulnerable languages lacking any sort of effective protection. Those enjoying recognition as official language in some autonomous communities include Catalan, Galician, Basque, and Aranese in Catalonia. Spanish is natively spoken by 74%, Catalan by 17%, Galician by 7% and Basque by 2% of the Spanish population. Some of the most spoken foreign languages used by the immigrant communities include Moroccan Arabic, Romanian, and English. Education. State education in Spain is free and compulsory from the age of 6 to 16. The current education system is regulated by the 2006 Educational Law, LU, or Fundamental Law for the Education. In 2014, the LU was partially modified by the newer and controversial LOMS Law, or Fundamental Law for the Improvement of the Education System, commonly called Ley Wert. Since 1970 to 2014, Spain has had 7 different educational laws. The levels of education are preschool education, primary education, secondary education, and post-16 education. In regards to the professional development education or the vocational education, there are 3 levels besides the university degrees: the Formación Profesional Básica, the Ciclo Formativo de Grado Medio or CFGM, which can be studied after studying the secondary education, and the Ciclo Formativo de Grado Superior or CFGS, which can be studied after studying the post-16 education level. The Program for International Student Assessment, coordinated by the OECD, currently ranks the overall knowledge and skills of Spanish 15-year-olds as significantly below the OECD average of 493 in reading literacy, mathematics, and science. Health. The healthcare system of Spain is considered one of the best in the world, in 7th position in the ranking elaborated by the World Health Organization. The healthcare is public, universal, and free for any legal citizen of Spain. The total health spending is 9.4% of the GDP, slightly above the average of 9.3% of the OECD. Religion. Roman Catholicism, which has a long history in Spain, remains the dominant religion. Although it no longer has official status by law, in all public schools in Spain students have to choose either a religion or ethics class. Catholicism is the religion most commonly taught, although the teaching of Islam, Judaism, and evangelical Christianity is also recognized in law. According to a 2020 study by the Spanish Center for Sociological Research, about 61% of Spaniards self-identify as Catholics, 3% other faiths, and about 35% identify with no religion. Most Spaniards do not participate regularly in religious services. A 2019 study shows that of the Spaniards who identify themselves as religious, 62% hardly ever or never go to church, 16% go to church sometimes a year, 7% sometime per month, and 13% every Sunday or multiple times per week. Recent polls and surveys suggest that around 30% of the Spanish population is irreligious. The Spanish Constitution enshrines secularism in governance, as well as freedom of religion or belief for all, saying that no religion should have a state character, while allowing for the state to cooperate with religious groups. There have been 4 Spanish popes: Damasus I, Calixtus III, Alexander VI, and Benedict XIII. Spanish mysticism provided an important intellectual resource against Protestantism, with Carmelites like Teresa of Avila, a reformist nun, and John of the Cross, a priest, taking the lead in their reform movement. Later, they became doctors of the Church. The Society of Jesus was founded by Ignatius of Loyola, whose spiritual exercises and movement led to the establishment of hundreds of colleges and universities in the world, including 28 in the United States alone. The Society's co-founder, Francis Xavier, was a missionary who reached India and later Japan. In the 1960s, Jesuits Pedro Ayrup and Ignacio Ellacuria supported the movement of liberation theology. Protestant churches have about 1,200,000 members. There are about 105,000 Jehovah's Witnesses. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has approximately 46,000 adherents in 133 congregations in all regions of the country and has a temple in the Moratalas district of Madrid. A study made by the Union of Islamic Communities of Spain demonstrated that there were more than 2,100,000 inhabitants of Muslim background living in Spain as of 2019, accounting for 4–5% of the total population of Spain. The vast majority was composed of immigrants and descendants originating from the Maghreb and other African countries. More than 879,000 of them had Spanish nationality. The recent waves of immigration have also led to an increasing number of Muslims, Buddhists, Sikhs, and Hindus. After the Reconquista in 1492, Muslims did not live in Spain for centuries. Their ranks have since been bolstered by recent immigration, especially from Morocco and Algeria. Judaism was practically non-existent in Spain from the 1492 expulsion until the 19th century, when Jews were again permitted to enter the country. Currently there are around 62,000 Jews in Spain, or 0.14% of the total population. Most are arrivals in the past century, while some are descendants of earlier Spanish Jews. Approximately 80,000 Jews are thought to have lived in Spain prior to its expulsion. However, the Jewish encyclopedia states the number over 800,000 to be too large and 235,000 as too small. 165,000 is given as expelled as possibly too small in favor of 200,000. And the numbers of converts after the 1,391 pogroms as less. Other sources suggest 200,000 converts mostly after the pogroms of 1,391 and upwards of 100,000 expelled. Descendants of these Sephardic Jews expelled in 1,492 are given Spanish nationality if they request it. Culture. Spain is a Western country and one of the major Latin countries of Europe. Spanish culture is marked by strong historic ties to Catholicism, which played a pivotal role in the country's formation and subsequent identity. Spanish art, architecture, cuisine, and music have been shaped by successive waves of foreign invaders, as well as by the country's Mediterranean climate and geography. The centuries-long colonial era globalized Spanish language and culture, with Spain also absorbing the cultural and commercial products of its diverse empire. World Heritage Sites. Spain has 47 World Heritage Sites. These include the landscape of Monte Perdido in the Pyrenees, which is shared with France, the prehistoric rock art sites of the Coa Valley and Ciega Verde, which is shared with Portugal, the heritage of Mercury, shared with Slovenia, and the ancient and primeval beech forests, shared with other countries of Europe. In addition, Spain has also 14 intangible cultural heritage, or human treasures. Literature. Some early examples of vernacular Romance-based literature include short snippets of Mozarabic Romance sprinkled in Arabic and Hebrew texts. Other examples of early Iberian Romance include the glosses Emilianenses written in Latin, Basque, and Romance. Early medieval literature in Christian Iberia was written in Latin, which remained as the standard literary language up until the mid-13th century, whereas Ibero-Romance vernaculars and Basque were spoken. A decisive development ensued in the 13th century in Toledo, where Arabic scholarship was translated to the local vernacular, Castilian. In the scope of lyric poetry, Castilian existed alongside Galician Portuguese across the Crown of Castile up until the 16th century. The Romance variety preferred in eastern Iberia for lyrical poetry, Occitan, became increasingly Catalanist in the 14th and 15th centuries. Major literary works from the Middle Ages include the Canta de Mio Cid, Tyrant Lo Blanche, the Book of Good Love, and Coplas por l'amour de su padre. Genres such as Mestre de Juglaria and Mestre de Clericia were cultivated. Promoted by the monarchs in the late Middle Ages and even codified in the late 15th century, Castilian progressively became the language of the power elites in the Iberian Peninsula, further underpinning its prestige as the language of a global empire in the early modern period, which ushered in a golden era of Castilian literature in the 16th and 17th centuries, also in the science domain, eclipsing Galician and Catalan. Famous early modern works include La Celestina and Lazarillo de Tormes. The famous Don Quixote de la Mancha by Miguel de Cervantes was written in this time. Other writers from the period are Francisco de Quevedo, Lope de Vega, Calderon de la Barca, or Tirso de Molina. During the Enlightenment we find names such as Leandro Fernández de Moratin, Benito Jerónimo Feijoo, Gaspar Melchor de Jovellanos, or Leandro Fernández de Moratin. Baby steps of Spanish Romantic literature have been traced back to the last quarter of the 18th century, even if the movement had its heyday between 1835 and 1850, waning thereafter. In a broader definition encompassing the period from 1868 or 1874 to 1936, the so-called Silver Age of Spanish culture ensued. The waning of Romantic literature was followed by the development of Spanish realism, which offered depictions of contemporary life and society as they were, rather than romanticist or stylized presentations. The major realist writer was Benito Pérez Galdós. The second half of the 19th century also saw the resurgence of the literary use of local languages other than Spanish under cultural movements inspired by Romanticism such as the Catalan Renaixenca or the Galician Rexurdimento. Rarely used before in a written medium, the true fostering of the literary use of the Basque language had to wait until the 1960s, even if some interest towards the language had developed in the late 19th century. 20th century authors were classified in loose literary generations such as the generation of 98, the generation of 27, generation of 36 and the generation of 50. Premio Planeta de Novela and Miguel de Cervantes Prize are the two main awards nowadays in Spanish literature. Philosophy. The construct pertaining a distinctive Spanish philosophical thought has been variously approached by academia, either by diachronically tracing its development throughout the centuries from the Roman conquest of Hispania on, by pinpointing its origins to the late 19th century, or simply by outright denying its existence. The crux around the existence of a Spanish philosophy pitted the likes of Marcelino Menéndez y Pelayo against Antonio Pérez. Foreign imports such as Krausism proved to be extremely influential in Spain in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Art. Artists from Spain have been highly influential in the development of various European and American artistic movements. Due to historical, geographical, and generational diversity, Spanish art has known a great number of influences. The Mediterranean heritage with Greco-Roman and some Moorish influences in Spain, especially in Andalusia, is still evident today. European influences include Italy, Germany, and France, especially during the Renaissance, Spanish Baroque and Neoclassical periods. There are many other autochthonous styles such as the pre-Romanesque art and architecture, Herrerian architecture, or the Isabel-line Gothic. During the Golden Age, painters working in Spain included El Greco, José de Ribera, Bartolomé Esteban Murillo and Francisco Zurbarán. Also in the Baroque period, Diego Velázquez created some of the most famous Spanish portraits, such as Las Meninas and Los Hilanderas. Francisco Goya painted during a historical period that includes the Spanish Independence War, the fights between liberals and absolutists, and the rise of contemporary nation-states. Joaquín Sorolla is a well-known modern impressionist painter, and there are many important Spanish painters belonging to the modernism art movement, including Pablo Picasso, Salvador Dalí, Juan Gris, and Joan Miró. Sculpture. The Plateresque style extended from beginnings of the 16th century until the last third of the century, and its stylistic influence pervaded the works of all great Spanish artists of the time. Alonso Barragat is called the Prince of Spanish sculpture. His main works were the upper stalls of the choir of the Cathedral of Toledo, the tomb of Cardinal Tavera in the same cathedral, and the altarpiece of the Visitation in the Church of Santa Ursula in the same locality. Other notable sculptors were Bartolomé Ordóñez, Diego de Silo, Juan de Juni and Damián Forment. There were two schools of special flair and talent, the Seville school, to which Juan Martínez Montañes belonged, whose most celebrated works are the Crucifix in the Cathedral of Seville, another in Vergara, and a Saint John, and the Granada school, to which Alonso Cano belonged, to whom an Immaculate Conception and a Virgin of Rosary are attributed. Other notable Andalusian Baroque sculptors were Pedro de Mena, Pedro Roldán, and his daughter Luisa Roldán, Juan de Mesa and Pedro Duque Cornejo. In the 20th century, the most important Spanish sculptors were Julio González, Pablo Gargallo, Eduardo Chiolita, and Pablo Serrano. Cinema. After the first projection of a cinematographer in Spain by 1896, cinema developed in the following years, with Barcelona becoming the largest production hub in the country on the eve of the World War I. The conflict offered the Spanish industry of silent films an opportunity for further growth. Local studios for sound films were created in 1932. The government imposition of dubbing of foreign films in 1941 accustomed Spanish audiences to watching dubbed films. Spanish cinema has achieved major international success, including Oscars for recent films such as Pan's Labyrinth and Volver. Distinct exploitation genres that flourished in the second half of the 20th century include the fantaterror, the cinekinky and the so-called destape films. As of 2021, the festivals of San Sebastián and Málaga are ranked among the top cultural initiatives in the country. Architecture. Earth and gypsum are very common materials of the traditional vernacular architecture in Spain. Due to its historical and geographical diversity, Spanish architecture has drawn from a host of influences. Fine examples of Islamicate architecture, belonging to the Western Islamic tradition, were built in the Middle Ages in places such as Córdoba, Seville, or Granada. Similarly to the Maghreb, stucco decoration in Al-Andalus became an architectural style mark in the High Middle Ages. Simultaneously, the Christian kingdoms also developed their own styles, developing a pre-Romanesque style when for a while isolated from contemporary mainstream European architectural influences during the earlier Middle Ages. They later integrated the Romanesque and Gothic streams. There was then an extraordinary flourishing of the Gothic style that resulted in numerous instances being built throughout the entire territory. The so-called Mudahar style came to designate works by Muslims, Christians, and Jews in lands conquered from Muslims. The arrival of modernism in the academic arena produced much of the architecture of the 20th century. An influential style centered in Barcelona, known as Modernisme, produced a number of important architects, of which Gaudí is one. The international style was led by groups like Gatepack. Spain is currently experiencing a revolution in contemporary architecture, and Spanish architects like Rafael Muñoz, Santiago Calatrava, Ricardo Bofill as well as many others have gained worldwide renown. Music and dance. Spanish music is often considered abroad to be synonymous with flamenco, a West Andalusian musical genre, which, contrary to popular belief, is not widespread outside that region. Various regional styles of folk music abound in Aragon, Catalonia, Valencia, Castile, the Basque Country, Galicia, Cantabria, and Asturias. Pop, rock, hip-hop, and heavy metal are also popular. In the field of classical music, Spain has produced a number of noted composers such as Isaac Albeniz, Manuel de Falla and Enrique Granados, and singers and performers such as Placido Domingo, José Carreras, Montserrat Cabal, Alicia de la Roca, Alfredo Kraus, Pablo Casals, Ricardo Vines, José Iturbi, Pablo de Sarasate, Jordi Savall, and Teresa Berganza. In Spain there are over 40 professional orchestras, including the Orquestra Sinfónica de Barcelona, Orquesta Nacional de España and the Orquesta Sinfónica de Madrid. Major opera houses include the Teatro Real, the Gran Teatre del Liceu, Teatro Arriaga, and the El Palau de les Arts Reina Sofia. Thousands of music fans also travel to Spain each year for internationally recognized summer music festival Sonar, which often features the top up-and-coming pop and techno acts, and Benicassim, which tends to feature alternative rock and dance acts. Both festivals mark Spain as an international music presence and reflect the tastes of young people in the country. Vitoria-Gasteiz Jazz Festival is one of the main ones in its genre. The most popular traditional musical instrument, the guitar, originated in Spain. Typical of the north are the traditional bagpipers or gaiteros, mainly in Asturias and Galicia. Cuisine. Spanish cuisine consists of a great variety of dishes which stem from differences in geography, culture, and climate. It is heavily influenced by seafood available from the waters that surround the country, and reflects the country's deep Mediterranean roots. Spain's extensive history with many cultural influences has led to a unique cuisine. In particular, three main divisions are easily identified. Mediterranean Spain. All such coastal regions, from Catalonia to Andalusia, heavy use of seafood, such as pescado frito, several cold soups like gazpacho, and many rice-based dishes like paella from Valencia and arroz negro from Catalonia. Inner Spain. Castile hot, thick soups such as the bread and garlic-based Castilian soup, along with substantial stews such as cocido madrileno. Food is traditionally conserved by salting, such as Spanish ham, or immersed in olive oil, such as manchego cheese. Atlantic Spain. The whole northern coast, including Asturian, Basque, Cantabrian, and Galician cuisine. Vegetable and fish-based stews like caldo gallego and marmitaco. Also, the lightly cured Laken ham. The best-known cuisine of the northern countries often rely on ocean seafood, as in the Basque-style cod, albacore, or anchovy, or the Galician octopus-based polvo a fira and shellfish dishes. Sport. While varieties of football have been played in Spain as far back as Roman times, sport in Spain has been dominated by football since the early 20th century. Real Madrid CF and FC Barcelona are two of the most successful football clubs in the world. The country's national football team won the UEFA European Championship in 1964, 2008 and 2012 and the FIFA World Cup in 2010, and is the first team ever to win 3 back-to-back major international tournaments. Basketball, tennis, cycling, handball, futsal, motorcycling and, lately, Formula One also can boast of Spanish champions. Today, Spain is a major world sports powerhouse, especially since the 1992 Summer Olympics and Paralympics that were hosted in Barcelona, which stimulated a great deal of interest in sports in the country. The tourism industry has led to an improvement in sports infrastructure, especially for water sports, golf, and skiing. In their respective regions, the traditional games of Basque Pelota and Valencian Pilota both are popular. Public holidays and festivals. Public holidays celebrated in Spain include a mix of religious, national, and local observances. Each municipality is allowed to declare a maximum of 14 public holidays per year, up to 9 of these are chosen by the national government and at least 2 are chosen locally. Spain's National Day is celebrated on October 12th, the anniversary of the discovery of America, and commemorate Our Lady of the Pillar Feast, patroness of Aragon and throughout Spain. There are many festivals and festivities in Spain. Some of them are known worldwide, and millions of tourists from all over the world go to Spain annually to experience one of these festivals. One of the most famous is San Fermín, in Pamplona. While its most famous event is the Encierro, or the Running of the Bulls, which happens at 8 a.m. from 7 to July 14th, the 7 days-long celebration involves many other traditional and folkloric events. The events were central to the plot of The Sun Also Rises, by Ernest Hemingway, which brought it to the general attention of English-speaking people. As the result, it has become one of the most internationally renowned fiestas in Spain, with over 1 million people attending every year. Other festivals include La Tomatina Tomato Festival in Bunal, Valencia, the Carnivals in the Canary Islands, the Fallas in Valencia or the Holy Week in Andalusia and Castile and Leon. See also: Outline of Spain, Topographical relief of Spain. Notes.